All right, three keys to the South Carolina Kentucky game and three numbers to know that South Carolina will have to win if they want to beat Kentucky in Lexington. Locked on Gamecocks starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. It is great to have you along. It is Thursday night. We are recording this before we're about 2 days, a little under 2 days away from the South Carolina-Kentucky game. But I appreciate you guys tuning in to another episode of Locked On Gamecocks. I am your host, Chris Marler. Thank you for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we are a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, tonight's episode is brought to you by our good friends at FanDuel. And remember, now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks, a free trial for NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's get into the show. And we've got a good one for you. It's been a long week. I think a lot of people are not feeling super confident after the Old Dominion game. And I am here not to pump, any sunshine or anything like that, or just be completely irrational with the optimism. But I'm also not going to do that. I've got three numbers to know. We got a full in-depth deep dive into Kentucky, South Carolina, and what it's going to take for South Carolina to win. And honestly, guys, it's not that far-fetched of how to get that done. So there are three things I think that are key to winning this game. And you guys let me know in the comments if I'm right, wrong, somewhere in between, or what you think the key is as well. This is the number I keep coming back to, and we'll start with that, and that's turnovers, winning the turnover battle, all right? And it sounds simple. It sounds like it's kind of cliche, whatever. But with this game and with this opponent specifically, it's huge. Now, South Carolina they forced 4 turnovers a week ago against ODU, including the 2 inside the 10-yard line, which were obviously huge. Dating back to 2021, so over the last 3+ years, South Carolina leads the SEC in total turnovers gained with 68. 68. That is the best in the entire SEC. Now, you look at Kentucky, and over the same time period, their starting quarterbacks have thrown a combined 36 interceptions, which is more than any other starting quarterbacks in the SEC as well. If you can force any turnovers, and I don't mean like have to get super lucky like you did a week ago and get 2 inside the 10-yard line, that would help. But if you can win the turnover battle against Kentucky, and especially Kentucky, that is a team that does not respond well when they lose the turnover battle or when they turn the ball over in general. And it's something that's plagued them for the last 3+ years. Even their good players. Will Levis was very turnover prone, had double-digit interceptions both years he was a starter. Devin Leary was the same way last year. You look at their running backs, Chris Rodriguez, he had like 6 or 7 fumbles lost in one season alone. He was more than turnover prone, and he was also the leading rusher in the entire conference. So I feel like if you were trying to win this game, and it's on the road, and it's not been a very friendly place overall for South Carolina over the last several years. Kroger Field doesn't get a ton of credit for being one of like the more difficult road environments, especially in the SEC, but it has been for South Carolina. You won your last trip there, right? You won 2 in a row there, but you take it back a few years prior to that, and you're talking about you've lost 7 of 8 in the 8 years prior. So how do you continue this current winning streak? Like what do you have to do if you're Shane Beamer in South Carolina? There's several things, and I think it starts with the turnovers. And again, I know that sounds cliche. Some of the other things that we'll get into more tomorrow, like the X's and O's stuff, yeah, I think that's equally as important, if not more important. Keeping the pocket clean, making sure you're not getting, that front seven in your backfield all day. And they've got a very, very good front seven with maybe the best defensive tackle in the entire country. And last year, he ate you alive. He had like 9 tackles. The defensive tackle for Kentucky, Deion Walker, he led the team in tackles against you. That rarely happens for a defensive tackle to do that. Now, getting back to just the surface level numbers to know. Again, if you can win the turnover battle, and that includes Lenore's taking care of the football, none of the backs, none of the receivers, no fumbles, nothing crazy on kickoffs, that is the first recipe for success against Kentucky. I mean, really for every game, but Kentucky specifically. And here's the other one, right? That's the first one. Here's another one for you. Talking about the turnovers, in games where Kentucky has not won the turnover battle against Power 4 teams or SEC teams, I'm not talking about like Akron. I know they played Southern Miss a week ago. I'm talking about since 2020, right? Over the last 4 years, when they play a Power 4, Power 5 opponent and they lose the turnover battle, they are 3-11 since 2020. 3-11. Win the turnover battle, win the game. It's as simple as that. I mean, there's some other things obviously that have to go your way, but like you've seen this number in Vegas climb, from I think it opens around like 4 or 5, and now it's up to like in some places double digits. I'm looking at our friends at FanDuel right now; it's 8.5. And I know that a lot of South Carolina fans don't feel super confident after what happened last week. But if you can start there, if you can win the turnover battle there, you're going to be in really, really good shape. All right, what is the next number to know, stat, whatever, column on the stat sheet and box score that you have to win if you're South Carolina? Because, and like, listen, this isn't just trying to be like a stat sheet warrior looking at certain things and like not getting into the in-depth parts of the game, because there's going to be a lot more that decides this game than just some simple statistics. But if you look at like where South Carolina has won over the past 2 seasons, specifically against this team, and where they've won under Shane Beamer or had struggles under Shane Beamer, these are the categories I feel like in stats that they have either, like I said, had tremendous success with, or disappointment and not as much success with. And the same for Kentucky. Like, it eats Kentucky fans alive that really, after they had to get rid of the 2021 win against South Carolina because they were caught with cheating. I'm not going to get too much into that, but like, they had to, I think, like retroactively forfeit games or whatever. You could make the case that Kentucky and Mark Stoops haven't beaten Shane Beamer once. They've done on the field once in 3 years, but they've lost 2 in a row to Shane Beamer. And this head coach rivalry in itself, you've seen it rear its head at media days. You've heard some like thinly veiled shots in press conferences and post game and all that kind of stuff. It's not really two schools that really like each other. Now it's not as heated or as much of a rivalry in some cases as like Georgia has been, or your traditional divisional rivals, Florida, Tennessee, things like that. But it has become much more heated, I feel like, of a rivalry, and not even just in football, but in year round, because of where the two programs are and where the two programs are trying to be. Now, I already brought the turnovers thing. Again, 68 total turnovers forced and won by South Carolina's defense under Clayton White since 2021 season. When you pair that with the fact that it's something Kentucky has struggled a tremendous amount with, that's why I think it's important. Same as the next one. Scoring first. South Carolina has to get off to a good start. Plain and simple, the last 2 years when you've beaten Kentucky, you scored first in both those games, and you want to start looking at similar things that carried over year to year from 2022 and 2023, and those wins, that's one of them. Scoring first. They were up 7-0 in the first quarter of the game, I think, last year, and they were up 10-0 in the first quarter 2 years ago when they were in Lexington. Get on Kentucky and get on them early, and there's a reason why. It's so important. South Carolina, again, they have scored first in both of the last 2 meetings, and they won both those games. Kentucky is 9-2 in their last 11 games over the last 2 seasons, right, when they have scored first. They are 9-2 over the last 2 years when they score first. They are 3-10 in their last 13 games where they haven't. 3-10. And there's a couple in there that are thrown in, and I'll pull it up real quick in this notebook. There's a couple of, like, I think that even the 3 wins are like a Vandy. Louisville was like last year. You have just scrolling through a couple. Eastern Kentucky is another one. So when you play real competition and you turn the ball over and you don't score first, it has been a recipe for disaster for Kentucky, a recipe for disaster. I understand they're at home. I understand they have a really good team this year. And I think it is just like the last 2 years, like, projected to be around 8 wins, 7-8 wins, not that far off from where South Carolina like wants to be or can be, especially if they win this game. But let's not get crazy, because this is something that has plagued Mark Stoops teams for a while now. Same with the turnovers. Same with the turnovers. And the thing with the turnovers, again, it's not even just one position. It's not even just your quarterback. It's not like you had Jared Garantano out there throwing like a bazillion interceptions. It wasn't that. It was your running backs. It was your starting quarterback. It was your backup quarterback. It was multiple players on the team that were your best players that still plagued Kentucky and Mark Stoops. And another thing has been these slow starts. They have been one of the worst first quarter teams in the country over the last year or two, especially last year. They were awful in the first quarter games. Like you look at like the 2023 season and the 2022 season. They only scored first in like 11 of their last 27 games. That's tough to do because you don't play, all 27 of those games against Georgia and Bama and Tennessee or whatever. They've only scored first in 11 of their last 27 games. And a lot of those have been against Akron and Vandy and Youngstown State and things like that. Again, 9-2 in the last 2 years when they do score first in those 11 games, 9-2. When they don't, they're 3-10. They're also 0-2 against South Carolina when that happens. So get on them and get on them early. And that is another huge, huge potential pathway to success if you're South Carolina. Now, real quick, before we get into the very last one and break down some more numbers to know, I do want to tell you about our good friends at FanDuel. I already told you about the promotion. NFL starts tonight, which is obviously very exciting for a lot of people. Listen, you've heard us talk about FanDuel. You've heard us talk about how it's America's #1 sports book, and they have tons of early season deals, promos, and everything in between. But one thing they have this year that's unlike anything they've done before, it is available to you and listeners everywhere for Locked On. And from now until September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and you get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So as long as you have a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game all season long. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payments, and you can cancel anytime. If that's not enough, FanDuel also has something special for our listeners this weekend. Be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's Double Your Winnings for all Sunday, September 8th pre-game moneyline bets. Profit Boost will be live starting Friday, September 6th. View your account page and more, and it will tell you everything you need to know and learn about your boost. Just visit FanDuel.com. Again, America's #1 sportsbook today. All right, when we get back, we will continue talking about the deep dive in numbers to know, and I will give you the third statistic that Kentucky will have to fall behind if South Carolina wants to win on Saturday. All that and more, Locked On Gamecocks continues up next. All right, guys, welcome back in. I appreciate you guys joining us. So, again, we're recording this Thursday night. We have all the updated lines, all that good stuff. We'll give a prediction episode tomorrow. I want to hear from y'all as well, what you think is the most important matchup, breakdown, score predictions, all the above. Send them to me on social media or in the comments on YouTube. Remember, Vern Funquist CFB on Twitter and Instagram, as well as Locked On SC is the show Twitter handle as well. So send all of those there. All right, the very last one. And I feel like, once again, it's something that seems obvious, but if it weren't as important and it wasn't so prevalent, we wouldn't bring it up. So your third number to know and key to victory for South Carolina, you got to hold them under 21 points. That's a number that I feel like going into the season, we kept talking about over and over and over about how South Carolina's defense would be able to keep them in games a lot this year because of how they're built, for one. And it could be bend but don't break, however you want to describe it. Keeping people out of the end zone and forcing opportune turnovers at opportune times of the game especially, that's always been a key to victory for any team at any level of the sport. But with South Carolina this year, again, you have enough really, really good players that I think all season long, they are going to be Lenore Sellers and that offense's best friend for the first part of the year, because they are going to be able to help get through some of the rough patches that you saw a week ago against Old Dominion. But keeping Kentucky, and specifically Kentucky, under 21 points, Obviously, you want to hold everyone to under 20, 21 points. But Kentucky especially, you've done it again over the last 2 seasons. Last 2 years, you've held Kentucky to under 300 yards of total offense. You've finished even or ahead in the turnover battle. And you have held them to under 21 points, and you've held them under 16 points in all 3 years that Beamer has been in Columbia. Kentucky has not scored more than 16 points against South Carolina in the last 3 years. I understand they won one of those games, but that is not a recipe for success for Mark Stoops, really for anyone, but especially this team. They do not have a defense that's good enough, and they also turn the ball over way more than they should. So they do not. Rarely do they find themselves in positions to win when they aren't able to put up a ton of points. And if you don't believe me, the numbers more than show it. Kentucky, when they are held under 21 points, this is over the last 5 years, they are 3-20. 3-20 when scoring 21 points or less. During the same time, when they score 17 points or less, they're only 1-16. Granted, that one win was against South Carolina in 2021, but 1-16 in those games over the last 5 years when they score 17 points or less. And again, South Carolina has held them to 16 points or less in all 3 of the last meetings where Shane Beamer's been the head coach. And when Clayton White's been the DC. We can talk about all we want with all the struggles that this offense has had, especially in week 1 with Lenoris and over the last 2 years, really at times, or last year plus with Dowell Loggins, like whatever. The defense was not the problem last week. The defense, I don't think, will be the problem this week. And sure, it is a daunting task to go in there and try to beat Kentucky for a 3rd straight year. But, I mean, here's the thing, guys. I don't feel like they were favored of the last 2 years, right? I mean, I can look up the numbers, but I'm fairly sure they weren't. If you can have this defense who has like, listen, here's the best example I can give you of like matchups, because sometimes there's just certain teams and certain matchups, certain coordinators, whatever, that just have another team or coach's number. Look at Tennessee. Tennessee has been one of the best offenses in college football. Josh Heupel, all of his offenses have been some of the best offenses in college football since he's been an OC, dating back to when he was at Mizzou. Drew Lock broke an SEC record for passing touchdowns in a season in 2016 or 2017 with 43 passing touchdowns. You look at all the numbers he put up as the head coach and play caller at UCF. Obviously, what he's done at Tennessee has been remarkable for the most part, minus Joe Milton. But offensively, the numbers they put up consistently against all opponents, almost all opponents. Tennessee's one of the best offensive teams in the country. They score on everybody except Georgia. For whatever reason, listen, they've put up a ton of points against Bama and Nick Saban. They put up 52 on them a couple of years ago. For whatever reason, they don't ever do that against Kirby Smart in Georgia. And there are other teams that have been able to do it against Georgia at times, right? I mean, but Tennessee, as potent as that offense has been, for a number of years, they have been able to go in and whether it's in Knoxville, whether it's in Athens, whatever, Georgia has just, suffocated them. Every single game against Kirby Smart and that defense, they've had their number. That's what Clayton White has done to Kentucky. You could argue the fact that it might be even more significant because they've held them to less points. I mean, 3 years, 16, 14, and 10 total points scored. I mean, if that doesn't, I don't know what else you could do from a defensive standpoint. I just don't. Sorry, 16, 14, and 14. But they haven't allowed 3 scores in a game against South Carolina's defense since Clayton White has been the DC. So I know what happened last Saturday. I know what happened on Sunday when we had our meltdown and overreaction video and all that kind of stuff. It was the most watched and most interacted with and engaged video we've done. And I know there's a lot of angry fans, a ton. But it is a new week. And you're not going to play Georgia. You're not going to play Tennessee. You're not going to play Ohio State. You're not going to play Bama, Texas, any of those teams right now. You're going to play an unranked Kentucky team, and this is a gettable game. This is a very gettable game. So those are the positive numbers that I think South Carolina fans maybe didn't know, or maybe aren't looking at enough to get a little bit of a confidence boost going into Lexington. We're going to finish up the show with one more set of numbers to know that you have to avoid if you're South Carolina and Shane Beamer. Just flat out, you have to avoid these numbers if you are going to win this weekend. So we will continue next. But before we do, I do want to give a quick shout out to our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn. It is, I'm sure all of you are familiar with it. When you're hiring for your small business, or if you're just looking for a job, you want to find quality professionals that fit and are in the right role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and free. Now, remember, LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't even actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're not looking in the right place. In fact, you're probably looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Again, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Remember, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply, but do it today. All right, we have one more segment before we get out of here and into the start of the weekend. Locked on Gamecocks continues next. All right, guys, let's close out the show with some, I don't want to say it's negative numbers. It's just stats and factual information about South Carolina heading into this. And it's some things that you're going to have to avoid. I've already told you that the three stats they're going to have to come out on top of if they want to win in Lexington. Again, you're an 8.5-point underdog against Kentucky on the road. It's gone up to 10 points in some cases. If you get that game at 10 points, then 1,000% take it. Here's the thing, the thing that worries me the most. We talked about the good, we'll talk about the bad real quick. And honestly, I would say the ugly, but this is the ugly. What worries me the most is this South Carolina team and how they are going to respond by being on the road. It has not been a program under Shane Beamer that has done really well at all on the road, but especially in road games against SEC teams. Over the 3 years that he's been the head coach, South Carolina is 2-10 in SEC road games, just 2-10. They are 16-12 in road games overall. They're 16-6 at home, by the way, but they are just 6-12 in road games overall and 2-10 on the road against SEC opponents. And here's the thing: it's not abnormal for that to happen. Like I've told you all offseason, one of the reasons why I think that South Carolina still has a really good chance to upset somebody, whether it be A&M or Mizzou or Ole Miss or LSU this season, is because you get all four of those games at Williams-Brice. It's tough to win on the road. In that Ole Miss preview episode, I told you how drastically their numbers fall off when they leave Oxford and have to go anywhere on the road, right? So it's hard to win on the road, especially in this league. But 2-10 is not good. 2-10 is not good. They were 0-4 a year ago. And here's the thing. You were 0-4 a year ago, and you lost those games by an average of like 16.5 points per game. But the 10 losses that you've had over the last 3 years under Beamer against SEC opponents on the road, you've lost by an average of 20.7 points per game. 20.7. Now, the two times you won by double digits. It was the win in Lexington a few years back when they won 24-14, and another win against Vandy, I believe it was like 38-27. But they have not played well on the road. They look night and day different. They score an average of, I'm trying to do the math on it real quick, about 8.5 points less per game in road games versus games in Williams-Brice. They allow over 11 points more per game on the road versus at home under Beamer. So, over the last 3 years, in home games, they've allowed an average of 21.3 points per game. That's good. On the road, they've allowed 32.7 on average. That is not great. It's also just the way the offense looks. in every single game. Like the defense has been fine at times, but the defense, gives up an average of about 71 more yards per game on the road versus at home, which isn't a huge deal, but the offense is night and day. The offense has been very different. And a year ago, even, they averaged 112 yards per game less in road games versus games at home. 112. I'm talking like under 300 yards per game total every time you went on the road or on average. So you have got to figure out a way to get ahead early, keep this thing close going into the fourth quarter. You cannot have any turnovers or stupid mistakes. Now, listen, Kentucky teams under Mark Stoops have been notorious. We don't talk about it enough because we praise Mark Stoops for being, 7-6 every year because he's doing it at Kentucky. I don't know when that's going to ever die out. At this point, the luster of that stat, I feel like should have already lost its shine. But one of the things about his teams that we don't ever talk enough about is how many mental mistakes, self-inflicted wounds, all those things. South Carolina cannot afford to do that on the road. They've got to figure out a way to keep protecting the football, get Lenore Sellers going, and he flat out has to be way better, not just a little bit, but way better than he was in week one. Everyone knows that. He knows that. I think the offense knows it. So I'm excited because I think that's a game where you can watch the tape, figure out where you went wrong, but it's pretty clear to everybody you talk to, whether it be a fan to when Aaron Murray, the analyst that played the position and was at the game in the booth. It was a horrible game by him. He looked very uncomfortable and indecisive. It was his first game as a starter. I kind of love the fact that he's going to Kroger Field because it's his first road game for sure. It's going to be tough, but it's like you don't get him at night. And it's not like you're walking into the Swamp or Death Valley or Athens or anything like that. You're going to walk in front of 60,000 people who just have zero expectation of losing that game. And every time that's happened over the last 2 years, between these two teams, South Carolina has won. So, can Lenore Sellers and Dowell Loggins figure out a way to get enough points on the board, get over 20, have the defense do what the defense has done repeatedly to this team in the Shane Beamer era? If they do, they can win. And then you're talking about you're 2-0 instead of 1-1, and that whole doom and gloom scenario, I wouldn't say it's out the window because you still have a very tough schedule to play, but ending the month at 3-1 as opposed to 2-2, that feels a lot better. That feels a lot better, and it creates a lot more confidence with this team, the fan base, and most importantly, a lot of those young guys and that quarterback going the rest of the way. So that is all for tonight's episode. I appreciate you all joining us. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Thursday night. Tomorrow, we will have an SEC prediction show as well as another in-depth breakdown of this game specifically, answering some of y'all's questions, going over y'all's predictions as well as my own. Maybe we'll do some best bets. That will be Friday's episode. And then hopefully Saturday night or Sunday morning, we'll have an emergency pod going over the big win and the third year in a row for Shane Beamer over Kentucky. So that is all. I appreciate you all joining us tonight. Make sure you are tuning into the show tomorrow and following along on social media as well. We will see y'all then.